In this video, we're going to be talking about the history and development of our Great White Distortion pedal. So this one's this pedal was a long journey for us. It was full of hurdles and obstacles and lots of challenges that we had to overcome. It took us probably 5 months of continuous frustration to make this pedal a reality. And essentially, what we wanted to create was a Marshall style drive pedal that could range anywhere from like a light overdrive into heavy distortion. When we cranked the drive during testing, we noticed that it actually kind of got into fuzz territory a little bit too. So let's start at the beginning and we'll talk about what our goals were whenever we were developing the pedal. We wanted to make like a Marshall style overdrive with a 3-band EQ and then also make it bass friendly by incorporating a toggle switch that would allow you to select between the standard input capacitor value that comes in most guitar pedals. You can also choose a larger input capacitor that would allow more bass frequencies to pass through. We didn't want to do a bass boost because we already have a 3-band EQ on the pedal. We just wanted to allow the difference between bass and guitar to come through. With the standard input capacitor, you're filtering off a little bit of the low end of the guitar signal, which is usually a desirable thing. We realized that overdrive is used in modern music and modern metal on bass pretty frequently nowadays, and that's kind of where the idea came from, was how could we make this pedal play more friendly with bass guitar without increasing the size of the enclosure or incorporating a bunch of components on an already packed board. That's kind of the idea, and it was a headache to develop. We started off with like a basic overdrive circuit and then just modified it to the point where it's not even recognizable when compared to the base circuit that we started with. We went through 6 prototypes before we got it right. Let's talk about those prototypes for a second, because it went through many stages and many tests to get the pedal to where we want it to be and where we were happy with the functionality and the sound quality that was coming out of the pedal. So the first prototype is this one right here. It's pretty big. It actually doesn't even fit in an enclosure because it 125B enclosure, which is what we had planned for the pedal. It's too wide. The board overall is too wide. We wanted to use mini potentiometers, and it was our first time ever using potentiometers like this. And so that was kind of unknown territory for us whenever we set out to make this pedal. You can see where we were having issues with some of the components, and so I was having to clip out the original components and then kind of just solder on the legs of the new components that we were testing. But I knew this wasn't the final version, so it didn't really matter. But you can see we originally intended to use 1N4148 silicon diodes for the clipping section. So that's something that changed throughout the development process. When we moved on to the second prototype, we got the form factor down. It was a much more narrow board. The toggle switch, I actually had the wrong kind, so I had to like bend the legs of the toggle switch out. But on this board, we incorporated the relay at the bottom. This system is what eventually became our electronic true bypass relay system, which is really cool. The problem that we ran into with this prototype is that everything was mounted on one board. It was so long that when the foot switch sat under the board, it tilted the board inside the enclosure. So if the enclosure was here and the components, the board mount potentiometers and switches had to go through the enclosure, then by the time the foot switch was underneath the circuit board, it was trying to angle it up like this. There was no way that we could make that work. On this board, you will notice that we still have the silicon diodes for clipping. So this wasn't going to work. Also, we weren't getting any sound out of this one, which was unfortunate. And you can also see that we labeled it as bass op drive because we were thinking it was maybe going to end up being just a bass pedal at one point as well. With the third version, we got a little bit closer. The relay was still on this board, and we still thought that it was going to work even with the board being tilted inside the enclosure like this. That turned out not to be the case, of course. This board, you can see, up until this point, we've only had the 2 IC chips. And then this here is a timer chip. So on the 4th version, we really started to hone in on, what we needed to do to make this a functioning circuit. We still only had 2 ICs, but we were getting close with this. On this one, almost everything was perfect, except for we just still weren't getting sound out of it. We couldn't figure out what was going wrong. We actually, I don't think, ever figured out why this one didn't work. We traced the entire circuit and just couldn't figure out what was going on with it. But we knew we were getting close. The relay, you can see, is still attached. I was really insistent on having one board so that we could make the most stable product possible. I realized that even though everything in here would be pretty stable, people are going to stomp on these. And I wanted to make it as sturdy as possible so that it didn't fall apart when someone was using it in a practical setting, On the 5th version, we ended up adding a 3rd IC. The reason for that is that we noticed we were getting some oscillation in the circuit itself. At first, we were suspicious that maybe it was just feedback because it's a very high gain circuit. But anytime you use the EQ to boost any of the frequency bands, it would start to oscillate. And we knew that just wasn't going to work. This is the version where we decided for sure we were going to switch to using blue LEDs for clipping. We were very close with this, and even though there were times where we felt like giving up, this gave us hope. The 6th version was the final version, essentially. So you can see that we have 3 ICs just like on the previous board. It's because we added a buffer. We realized that the self-oscillation was being created because of impedance issues. And we did a lot of probing, we did a lot of testing, did a lot of measurements using a multimeter, and nothing really made sense to us as far as why we would be getting the oscillation inside the circuit itself with everything properly grounded and shielded. It didn't make any sense. But with the previous version, I noticed that when I put the prototype after my clone, which has a buffer in it, I noticed that it fixed the oscillation issues. Stefan and I brainstormed and realized that it seemed like a buffer would serve a dual purpose. We could have a buffered pedal that would function as a buffer if someone needed a buffer for the rest of their board, and also it would fix the pedal itself. And so I made a clone of a very popular buffer on strip board. I connected my guitar signal into that buffer and then into one of the previous versions of the Great White Distortion, and it fixed all of the issues. And so we knew that was it. We had figured it out. We knew what we needed to do to fix the functionality of the pedal, make it a stable circuit, and also when we decided to split the relay system off of the main distortion section, it fixed the way that the circuit fit inside of an enclosure as well. And so this is the final version that we came up with, and this is our current version, and it just works. It's amazing. We're really proud of how this pedal turned out. This is what it looks like on the inside. And so you can see it's a very tight fit. The top potentiometers actually touch the screw hole shaft thing. So it's up as far as it could possibly go. And then we have the relay system here on its own daughter board. And so the way we wire that is very carefully. We run wires from the main PCB into the daughter board underneath so it looks clean and tidy. And then we just push that down over the main circuit board. And so it fits perfectly. It's jam-packed, has tons of features. It sounds great. We knew we had done it. We have the toggle switch. We have a active 3-band EQ. The mid control in particular is extremely powerful. It can change the entire tonality of the circuit on its own. Then we have a very usable drive setting where you can get anything from like a crunchy tone all the way when you start to get into about 3 o'clock on the drive, it starts to become kind of fuzzy actually. But the pedal is really dynamic because it uses those blue LEDs. And so the more you dig in with this pedal, the more distortion it's going to produce. And then you have, of course, your master output volume control, which is really great. So you can crank up the distortion and still not have to drive the front of your amp as hard if you don't want to. Of course, you can also crank that and just obliterate your amp if you feel like it. That's up to you. Something else that I kind of need to talk about, because it's going to come up in TA Pedal's future. Something that we were really struggling to do was to implement a clean blend. You know, we wanted this to be a bass-friendly pedal. Something that's really common to do in modern bass tones is to distort the bass guitar, but then blend the clean signal back in so that you retain the clarity of the bass. We tried to implement that. That's why this one has 3 knobs. This one has 3 knobs. This was the 4th version. We were still working on it up until the 4th version. We also had impedance issues with that. That's why we had to drop it. It just wasn't working. We tried so many different versions of a clean blend, and for some reason we couldn't get it to cooperate with the main circuit. But we are hopeful that we can implement that in the future. It's a feature that we would really like to incorporate, and it's on the to-do list for sure. But because we were kind of pressed for time on this release, and we just, for whatever reason, couldn't figure out how to implement that, we decided to just drop it on this version. And we did enough testing to where we felt confident that it's still extremely useful for bass. We aren't disappointed by the way it sounds on bass at all. Just one of those hurdles that we couldn't overcome in the time frame that we had available. So it's our second pedal in our aquatic series. I don't really know what we're calling it, but it's a line of pedals that has scary sea creatures on it. Our first was the vampire squid, of course. Now we have a great white shark, and look at that thing. It's mean. It looks mean, and it sounds mean, so it works together. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions about the development of the Great White Distortion, if you have any suggestions for future videos, if you just want to chat, we're always available. We're very active on our Instagram page, so feel free to message us on there. We're at TA Pedals, and you can also email us at tapedals@gmail.com, and we will talk to you on the next video.